This video is part of a discussion with YouTube user Telemantros about atheism, specifically his claim that life without God is absurd. At this stage there are two fundamental assertions made by Telemantros with which I disagree. These are that we must have an objective and timeless meaning, value and purpose in our lives in order that they not be absurd, and the second is that those atheistic worldviews which do provide happiness are inconsistent because they borrow from theism with specific reference to morality. I furthermore disagree with the assertion that the values obtained from Christianity are strictly objective, at least not in the sense that Telemantros demands of atheism. First, let's deal with the need for our meaning, value and purpose to be ultimate. It is true that Telemantros said in his first video that these things must be ultimate. He also clearly values that they be objective. But while he may have established that any meaning, value and purpose atheists have is only relative, the conclusions he drew were made without such distinctions, such as when he used the phrase, "You will genuinely have to come to grips that your life has no purpose, meaning and value." There are two quotes used by Telemantros which are pertinent here. The second of these is from Richard Dawkins. Here is the quote as it appeared in River Out of Eden. "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." So what are the consequences of a universe that is indifferent to us? According to Telemantros, anyone who truly believes this should reach the same conclusion as Nietzsche's madman who despairs at the death of God. I have a number of problems with this, partly owing to the fact that I am unconvinced by the claim that using this as evidence is not an appeal to authority. I have no problem with quotes such as these being used to illustrate a point, but Telemantros uses it as a basis for his argument. Let's look at two other possible ways of finding sufficient meaning, value and purpose without God. In my video, I argued that meaning, value and purpose on a human scale was sufficient for the span of our lives. I do not seek to give the universe purpose, merely my own life. I acknowledge that what I conclude to be my own purpose will inevitably be different from that which others conclude for themselves. I don't see this as a problem. We're all individuals, and while our commonalities are more important than our differences, our individual natures mean that we must each seek out how best to approach life for ourselves. Much of life is subjective, and for me, an individual's choice of a life devoted to compassion as opposed to knowledge no more implies that one is right and the other wrong than one person listening to country music and the other listening to Italian progressive rock from the 1970s. Each choice is made by that individual based on their own knowledge of themselves. Note that this argument does not cover morality, which is about universal codes of behaviour, but I'll get to that later. More than Nietzsche, most modern atheists would relate to Carl Sagan's worldview. His response to the insignificance of our place in the universe is, instead of seeing the futility of human endeavour, is to see the futility of human avarice. Follow the link to the pale blue dot to see his beautiful elaboration on this point. Telemantros would counter that because Sagan spelt cosmos with a capital C and speaks in spiritual terms, he is borrowing from theism. I disagree. The argument that Sagan uses here is precisely based on a universe without God and invokes no higher purpose than our shared humanity. Any confusion here is due to the fact that Sagan often wrote in fields previously considered the sole domain of religion. On the subject of morality, Telemantros makes two claims. These are that objective moral standards are proof of God's existence, and that animals do not have moral obligations to one another. He is demonstrably wrong on both points. To examine this, let's look at the second Dawkins quote that Telemantros used. "My own feeling is that human society based simply on the gene's law of universal ruthlessness would be a very nasty society in which to live. The implicit question here is, if we are just collections of selfish genes, how could morality have come about? The first thing to consider is the fact that we are not simply genes in isolation, but organisms containing genes which we share in common with others. A selfish gene, which causes us to help another organism which shares the same gene, is acting entirely in accordance with its own selfish interests by ensuring that more copies of itself survive. This is at its strongest in the case of parents. As well as genetic preservation, another factor at play here is social synergy. Humans are social creatures because a group of 10 can achieve more than 10 individuals. Social groups only work, however, when there are codes of behaviour that govern us. For this reason, both acting in a considerate fashion and desiring to punish those who attempt to circumvent societal norms make evolutionary sense. Two universal taboos worth considering are incest and cannibalism. While both social mores are occasionally broken in isolated places, the taboo against these are widespread and both have obvious Darwinian purposes. All this would be mere unfounded speculation if Telemantros was right about animals not displaying moral behaviour. However, I have a few examples which I can provide. The most trivial example is honeybees. Drones will sacrifice themselves in order to protect the queen. Interestingly, bees are unique in inheriting 75% of their genes from their mother, which is probably necessary to perpetuate behaviour which is so altruistic. Bonobos are an ape with a matriarchal system. In Lolaya Bonobo Sanctuary, one group was observed with an overly aggressive male. The matriarchs first tried to moderate his behaviour by having sex with him, which is apparently fairly standard for bonobos. When this did not change his behaviour, 5 females banded together to use physical violence to curb his behaviour. Another example of that which in humans we would call moral obligations is found in the vampire bat. Vampire bats will often regurgitate their meal for other bats in their colony. Those who do not do so are ignored in later nights by other bats. Morality has good Darwinian reasons for being innate in us. To codify it in any way, we need philosophy. This will inevitably lead to differences on some level, but some principles, such as do unto others as you would have done unto you, can be established early on and with a fair degree of confidence. One final question worth asking is if Christianity can provide an ultimate meaning, value and purpose as Telemantros claims. Well, not in this lifetime. Who can tell the will of God? People who say they can are often untrustworthy. Morality, while established in some areas, is a matter of interpretation in others. In the 18th and early 19th century, the Quakers were considered mavericks because they opposed slavery in spite of what was commonly seen as biblical sanction. In short, neither the Christian nor the atheistic worldview offers all the answers as Telemantros demands. The difference is that Christianity offers the answers after death, but requires a greater leap of faith.